Silas Thorne was a man who knew the weight of things. He knew the weight of a winter-killed elk. He knew the weight of a loaded, and he knew the weight of a 12-year silence that lived in the hollow of his chest. Up here, in the jagged teeth of the Sierra Nevada, silence wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a physical thing. It was a layer of dust on the mantle. It was the way the pines didn't so much whisper as they groaned under the pressure of the wind. Silas lived alone, because the world down in the valley was too loud with lies. He had a cabin built of cedar and stone, a horse named Ghost that was as stubborn as a mountain mule, and a past he'd buried under a cairn of rocks 10 miles back. But that morning, the mountains decided to give something back. The snow was coming down in thick, wet flakes, the kind that muffled the world until you couldn't hear your own heartbeat. Silas was out checking the timberline fence when Ghost flared his nostrils. The horse didn't bolt. He just stopped, dead. Silas followed the animal's gaze. At first, he thought it was a down branch. Then, he thought it was a wolf carcass. But as he dismounted, his boots sinking into the fresh powder, he saw the flash of blue. Calico. She was face down in a drift of white, her hands blue with cold, her hair a matted tangle of dark silk. She wasn't moving. Silas reached down, his calloused hands trembling just a fraction. He turned her over, and the air left his lungs. She was young, barely 20, and her face was a map of tragedy. A split lip, a darkening bruise across a high cheekbone. As he lifted her, her eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat. They were a startling, haunted green, like the water at the bottom of a deep well. Her voice was a dry rattle, a sound that had no business coming from someone so young. "It's my first time," she whispered, her fingers clawing weakly at his heavy wool coat. "Please be gentle." Silas didn't answer. He couldn't. He just tucked her chin into his chest, swung back onto Ghost, and rode for the only sanctuary left in a world that clearly wanted this girl dead. This is where it gets interesting. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and old coffee. It was a man's space, functional, hard, and devoid of anything soft. Silas laid her on the cot by the hearth. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who had done this. In the West, those were questions that got people killed before the coffee finished brewing. He moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been a scout in the war. He built the fire until the cast iron stove began to glow a dull, angry red. He boiled water. He tore strips of clean linen from a spare shirt. He had to remove her boots. They were fine leather, ruined by the rocks and the ice. When he pulled them off, he saw the blisters. She hadn't been walking. She had been running. As he worked to clean the road grime from her face, she stirred again. The heat of the cabin was starting to bring the color back to her skin, but it was also bringing the pain. She winced as a warm cloth touched her lip. "I won't hurt you," Silas said. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. He hadn't used it in 3 days. She looked at him then, really looked at him. She saw the gray in his beard, the scars on his knuckles, the way his eyes never stayed on her for too long, as if he were trying to give her back the dignity the world had stripped away. "They're coming," she whispered. "Let 'em come," Silas replied. He stood up and walked to the corner, where his Winchester stood leaning against the wall. He checked the action. Smooth, cold, reliable. Up here, the mountain decides who stays and who goes. Not men. He went back to her, reaching for the heavy, blood-caked calico dress to check for more wounds. That's when he felt it. Something stiff. Something tucked into the hidden pocket near her waist. He pulled it out. It was a letter. The parchment was expensive, the kind of paper used by banks or lawyers in San Francisco. But it wasn't white anymore. A deep, rust-colored stain had bloomed across the center, obscuring the seal. It was a blood-stained letter, and as Silas caught a glimpse of the first few lines, he realized that the girl on his cot wasn't just a runaway. She was a witness. Silas didn't read the whole thing. Not yet. He set it on the table near his coffee tin. He could feel the weight of it from across the room. "What's your name, girl?" "Clara," she said. She was sitting up now, wrapped in one of Silas's oversized wool blankets. She looked like a child playing dress-up in a giant's house. "Clara Vance." Silas paused. The name Vance was well known in the valley. Cyrus Vane owned the silver mines, the railroad spurs, and half the judges from here to Sacramento. He was a man who didn't believe in the law. He believed in ownership. That letter, Silas said, nodding toward the table. That's why you're running. Clara looked at the blood-stained parchment. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She had spent all her tears on the trail. My sister was his secretary, Clara said. She saw the ledgers. She saw how he was stealing the land from the homesteaders, using the railroad to choke them out. When she tried to leave, she didn't make it, but she gave me that. She told me to run until I found someone who wasn't afraid of the dark. Silas looked out the window. The storm was worsening. The sky was a bruised purple. You found a man who lives in the dark, Clara. That's a different thing entirely. He picked up the letter. The blood on it was dry, but it felt warm to his touch. It was the blood of a woman who had died trying to do the right thing. In Silas's experience, that was the only kind of blood that ever truly mattered. He sent them after me, she continued, her voice trembling. The regulators. They don't arrest people, Mr. Thorne. They bury them. Silas sat down at the table. He picked up his sharpening stone and his hunting knife. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was a heartbeat. Silas watched her. She was drinking the bitter coffee he'd poured for her hands still shaking. She looked at the cabin. The sparseness of it. The way Silas didn't have a single photograph on the walls. You're hiding, too, she said. It wasn't a question. Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Why help me, she asked. You could just hand me the letter and tell me to keep walking. You'd be safer. Silas stopped sharpening the knife. He looked at the blade. It was a mirror. He saw a man he didn't much like. A man who had walked away from a lot of fights because he thought he had nothing left to lose. If you're still here, sitting by the fire with Silas and Clara, thank you for listening. This story is just getting started, and the real storm is about to break. If you're enjoying this journey into the high country, do Silas a favor. Hit that like button. It helps more folks find their way to the cabin. And if you want to see if the mountain holds its secrets, make sure you're subscribed. Now, let's get back to the timberline. 3 days passed. The storm held him captive, and in that time, a strange kind of peace settled over the cabin. It wasn't the peace of a home. It was the peace of a fortress. Silas taught Clara how to load the Winchester. Don't jerk the lever, he told her, his hand over hers. It's a conversation. You listen to the machine, and it listens to you. She was a fast learner. She had the kind of focus that only comes to people who have looked death in the eye and refuse to blink. They talked little, but they worked much. They mended harness leather. They salted meat. They prepared for the inevitable. On the 4th night, the wind died down. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was heavy. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. Silas was out on the porch. His eyes scanned the ridge road. He saw the flicker of a lantern 2 miles down. Then another. They're here, he said, stepping back inside. Clara stood by the hearth. She didn't look like the broken girl he'd found in the snow anymore. She had her hair pulled back. She was wearing one of his old leather vests, and she was holding the Winchester. Silas, she said, if this goes wrong, the letter. Promise me it gets to the marshal in Reno. Silas reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out the letter. He pulled out a single silver coin, a peace dollar. I don't make promises about things going wrong, Clara. I only make promises about things I can control. He handed her the coin. Keep that in your pocket. It's for luck. I'm going to the barn. When the first shot fires, you blow out the lamp and get under floorboards. Don't come out until you hear me whistle Yellow Rose. Silas. Be gentle with that trigger, Clara, he said, his first ghost of a smile touching his lips. Just like you asked me. Then he stepped out into the cold, a shadow merging with the shadows. Cyrus Vane didn't come himself. Men like him never did. He sent Miller, a man with a face like a hatchet and a reputation for enjoying his work a little too much. Miller had 4 men with him. They rode up the path with the confidence of men who thought they were the only ones with guns in the world. Miller stopped his horse 20 yards from the cabin. Thorne, he shouted, we know she's in there. Hand over the girl and the paper. and you can go back to being a ghost. Vane doesn't want your blood. He just wants what's his. Silence was the only answer. Don't be a fool, old man. Miller yelled, "There's 5 of us. You're just a relic of a war nobody remembers." From the darkness of the barn loft, Silas watched. He had the long-range Sharp's rifle resting on a hay bale. He breathed out, slow, steady. He didn't aim for Miller. He aimed for the lantern hanging from the lead rider's saddle. The lantern shattered. The horse bolted, screaming, as fire licked at its flanks. The night exploded into chaos. Silas didn't wait. He moved like a man half his age, a wraith in the timber. He knew every rock, every dip in the land. He wasn't just a man. He was the mountain itself. One of Miller's men dived for the porch. He never made it. A shot from the cabin window. Clara caught him in the shoulder. Silas took out 2 more from the flank. He didn't fire fast. He fired right. Each shot was a period at the end of a sentence. Miller was the last one standing. He had scrambled behind the stone well, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He realized too late that he hadn't walked into a cabin. He'd walked into a trap. Thorne. Miller screamed, firing blindly into the dark. "You can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding." Silas's voice came from directly behind him. Miller spun around, but Silas was faster. The butt of Sharps caught Miller across the jaw, sending him spiraling into the dirt. Silas stood over him, the moon finally breaking through the clouds, casting him in a cold, silver light. Silas reached down and pulled the blood-stained letter from his own coat. He dropped it on Miller's chest. "Take it back to Vane," Silas said. Miller blinked, blood dripping from his chin. "You're giving it back?" "No," Silas said. "Look at the back." "Tell Vane I'm coming down the mountain," Silas whispered. "And tell him I'm bringing the law with me." The next morning, the sun rose over a world that looked brand new. The snow was blindingly white. The air so crisp it felt like drinking ice water. Miller and his men were gone, dragged away or limping back to the valley to tell their master that the mountain had spoken. Silas stood on the porch, ghost saddled and ready. Clara stood beside him. She looked at the cabin one last time. "You're really coming?" she asked. "To Reno?" "A man can only stay silent for so long, Clara. Eventually, the weight gets to be too much. You have to put it down somewhere." He helped her up onto the spare horse they'd taken from Miller's men. "That letter," she said. "The blood on it, it's my sister's. I thought it was a curse, a reminder of what I lost." Silas climbed into his saddle. He looked out over the valley, where the towns and the mines and the noise waited. "It's not a curse, Clara. It's a map. It showed you the way to the only man in these hills stubborn enough to help. And it showed me the way back to being a man." They started down the ridge road, 2 figures against the vastness of Sierras. The West is a place where stories are written in blood and dust. Most of them end in a shallow grave. But every now and then, a story refuses to end. Every now and then, someone stands still while the rest of the world is running. And that is how justice is born, not in a courtroom, but in a cabin, over a cup of bitter coffee and a blood-stained letter. If the story touched something in you, if you believe that the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most, then thank you for riding with us. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you found Clara in the snow? Would you have opened the door or kept the fire for yourself? Pour yourself another cup of tea, stay warm, and we'll see you on the next trail. Because out here in the West, the sun always sets, but the truth just keeps riding.